The gymnasium smelled of canvas and sweat, and something older, something that had settled into the concrete floor over decades of Louisville winters. A boy stood near the metal lockers, watching his breath cloud in the cold air. His name was Cassius Clay. He was 14 years old. The white t-shirt he wore had been ironed that morning by hands that still remembered the weight of prayer, and his canvas shoes carried the faint scent of the soap his mother used to scrub them clean the night before. Around him, older fighters moved with the confidence of those who had been here before, wrapping their hands in practiced silence, their eyes focused on invisible opponents only they could see. Cassius kept his hands loose at his sides, but his fingers found the frayed edge of his gym bag again and again, tracing circles in the worn fabric. He told himself this was just another gym, just another ring. But the roar beyond the walls told a different truth. It was 1956, and the Louisville Golden Gloves preliminaries drew crowds that filled the bleachers until bodies pressed against bodies, until the air grew thick with cigarette smoke and the sharp voices of men placing bets they could not afford to lose. Joe Martin had entered the boy's name 3 weeks earlier without ceremony, simply writing it down in the ledger as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Since that day, Cassius had trained every afternoon until his knuckles split beneath the tape, until the heavy bag learned the rhythm of his combinations, until the basement gym became the only place where the noise in his head went quiet. But this was not that basement. This was the place where the city's best young fighters came to prove themselves. This was where boys either walked out with their heads high or learned the particular shame of being counted out while their families watched from wooden benches, silent and still. The boy had not slept well the night before. He had lain in his narrow bed, listening to his father move through the house, the floorboards creaking under weight that seemed heavier than usual. His mother's voice had drifted through the walls, soft and steady, speaking words he could not make out but understood anyway. His younger brother Rudy had asked him at breakfast if he was scared, and Cassius had said no, with the kind of certainty that only exists when you are trying to convince yourself. Now, standing in the cold locker room with the announcement echoing through the corridor, he wondered if fear was something you could simply decide not to feel, or if it was always there beneath everything else, waiting. Other fighters prepared around him with the mechanical precision of ritual. One boy near the door wore gloves so worn the leather had gone soft as cloth. Another shadow-boxed in front of a mirror that had cracked at some point and never been replaced, his reflection fractured into pieces that moved independently. Cassius watched them and felt something coil tight in his chest. These boys had fathers who boxed, brothers who boxed, cousins who wore championship belts like family heirlooms. Cassius had Joe Martin and a stolen bicycle and a basement where he had learned that pain was just information. He had long arms that other boys mocked in school, calling him Scarecrow, calling him all reach and no punch. He had speed that felt like electricity in his legs when he moved. He had anger that he had learned to compress into something cold and useful. But did he have what these other boys had? Did he belong here? Joe Martin appeared in the doorway, and the question dissolved. The trainer said nothing, but his hands were already moving toward the glove laces, already reaching for the tape. Cassius stood and crossed the concrete floor. As Martin worked the laces tight, the boy noticed his breathing had steadied. The nervous energy that had been jumping through his muscles all morning had settled into something focused and sharp. The gloves smelled like old sweat and leather oil. They were heavier than he expected, heavier than the training gloves, and when Martin finished, Cassius raised his hands and felt the weight of them pulling at his shoulders. The trainer said something about keeping his guard up, about watching for the body shot, about staying calm. Cassius nodded, but was not really listening. He was listening to something else, something that had been growing louder with each day in the gym. Each combination that landed clean, each moment when he had pushed past exhaustion into the place where only will remained. It was a voice that did not shout. It simply stated a fact. He was supposed to be here. They walked down the corridor together, trainer and fighter, and the noise grew louder with each step. Somewhere ahead, the crowd waited in their Sunday clothes and work jackets, in their pressed shirts and worn dresses, some of them having traveled from neighborhoods where Cassius could walk freely, and others from places where his presence required explanation. The gym itself existed in a kind of neutral territory, where boys could hit each other under bright lights, and everyone would cheer as long as the rules were followed and blood stayed inside the ring. But Cassius understood the invisible lines that ran through this city, the boundaries that shifted depending on the color of skin and the weight of history. He had learned them the way other boys learned to read, through repetition and consequence, through doors that closed and water fountains that were not meant for him. This tournament meant something beyond the trophy. It meant being seen. It meant taking up space in a room that did not always want to make room. The ring waited under lights so bright, they turned everything else into shadow. Cassius climbed through the ropes and felt the canvas give slightly beneath his feet. His opponent was already there, bouncing on his toes, shaking out his arms with the easy confidence of someone who had done this before. The referee called them to the center and spoke words that Cassius heard as pure sound, rhythm without meaning. Then they touched gloves, leather on leather, and returned to their corners. The bell rang, and time changed. The first round moved like a dream he was watching from outside his own body. His opponent came forward hard and fast, testing, pushing, trying to make the younger boy retreat. Cassius circled left, hands high, measuring distance the way Martin had drilled into him until it became instinct. His long arms kept finding range, the jab snapping out to touch glove and shoulder and sometimes air. The crowd noise rose and fell in waves. Somewhere in that wall of sound, he could hear his father's voice, distinct and insistent. But he did not look. His focus narrowed to the space between himself and the other fighter, to the rhythm of footwork and breath, to the small adjustments that happened too fast for conscious thought. By the end of the round, something had shifted. The other boy's confidence had dimmed slightly. His breathing had changed. Cassius heard it in the seconds between exchanges, that slight hitch, that fractional pause. The second round began with both fighters more cautious. They circled each other like chess pieces learning the board. Then, midway through, the other boy committed to a combination that left his body open for half a second. Cassius did not think. His right hand drove into the exposed ribs with a sound like meat hitting wood. The other fighter's guard collapsed. Cassius followed with his left, then his right again, not wild but controlled, each punch landing where he intended. The referee stepped between them and signaled for them to break, and when they separated, Cassius saw something in his opponent's eyes that had not been there before. Not defeat, not yet, but the knowledge that defeat was possible. The third round was no longer a question. Cassius moved with a certainty he had not felt in the first two rounds, his feet light on the canvas, his punches sharp and accurate. He was not trying to survive anymore. He was dictating pace. When the bell rang, he returned to his corner and sat on the stool while Martin worked the mouthguard free. The trainer said nothing, just pressed a water bottle to the boy's lips and nodded once. And in that nod, Cassius understood everything that needed to be said. When the referee raised his arm, the gymnasium erupted into noise that pressed against his ears like physical force. People stood and shouted and clapped and argued and celebrated and mourned all at once. But Cassius stood in the center of the ring, chest heaving, face blank, feeling nothing but a strange quiet in his head. Joe Martin climbed through the ropes and placed one heavy hand on his shoulder. The old trainer's face showed no surprise, just a kind of grim satisfaction, as if a prediction he had made in private had finally come true. This had not been luck. This had not been accident. This had been the beginning of something that would not stop now, even if someone wanted it to. Later, in the locker room, Cassius sat on the wooden bench, still wearing the gloves. Other fighters moved around him, some celebrating their own victories, others sitting in the particular silence of those who had lost. The boy did not speak to any of them. He sat with his hands resting on his knees, feeling the weight of the leather, the dampness of the tape beneath. He wanted to remember this feeling. Not the victory, exactly, but the moment just before the bell rang, when he had stood in the ring and understood with perfect clarity that he belonged there. That fear was just another opponent, that the lights did not make him smaller. They made him visible. Outside, his family waited in the winter evening. His father would be pacing, proud and anxious in equal measure. His mother would be still, her hands folded, her face composed. His brother would be bouncing with questions that would spill out the moment Cassius appeared. Tomorrow, he would return to the streets where nothing had changed, to the school where he was still the too tall boy with the fast mouth, to the basement gym where the heavy bag waited with its familiar resistance. But something had cracked open inside him under those lights. Not confidence. He had arrived with confidence. Something deeper. Permission to be exactly as large as he believed himself to be. Permission to take up space. Permission to step into rooms where he was not expected and refuse to leave until they made him part of the furniture. He unlaced the gloves slowly, working each finger free. The leather peeled away from his hands, leaving his skin pale and damp. He flexed his fingers and felt nothing but a pleasant ache, the kind that reminds you that you used your body the way it was meant to be used. Then he stood and walked toward the door where the evening waited, where his family waited, where the rest of his life waited, with its victories and losses and transformations still hidden in the distance, like cities seen from a highway at night. Some boys leave the ring the same way they entered. Others walk out carrying a truth they will spend decades proving to the world. Cassius Clay walked out that winter evening, understanding a simple fact that would shape everything that came after. The lights do not burn you. They reveal you. And if you are willing to be revealed, if you are willing to stand in the brightness and let the world see exactly who you are, then nothing in that world can make you disappear again. Not insult, not injustice, not the weight of history itself. You become permanent. You become undeniable. You become exactly what you were always.